everybody. Welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we're going to be talking about this book, The Work-Life Equation, written by Bill Maw, or William Maw is what it says in the title of this book. And we're going to be talking about how to actually create a wonderful place to work. And Bill has an equation that he's going to be sharing with us, and some ideas on values that are important to have in the workplace. So welcome, Bill.
Thank you, CJ. Thanks for having me on the show.
So what is the equation? What is the magic equation that will explain everything that we need to know about life and work?
Well, it is a behavioral equation, and I made it an equation because it kind of keeps things simple, and that's what I think people need to focus on. There's just so much to focus on today. And really, the equation itself is happiness and success is a function of what I call 4 C's and 2 R's, right? So the 4 C's are cooperation, consideration, compassion, courtesy, respect, and responsibility. So, on the face of it, those six words I just spoke out, people might go, oh, yeah, those sound pretty straightforward to me. But there's really a method to the madness here about the equation, and that is that you could come up with 40 or 50 different bad behaviors that people talk about, backstabbing, yelling, cursing, rude, whatever.
Right.
And I could pinpoint every one of those back to these 6 values.
Right. I actually have the 40. Do you want to hear what they are?
Well, you can give a couple out if you want.
Okay, here they are. I just did one. I'm sure I just did one, which is interrupting. But
that's all right.
The 40 that you have. And because I think it's interesting to think about these 40 things can all be mapped to core behaviors on the positive correlates of these things. So when people are yelling, cheating, chastising, withholding information, interrupting, which I just did, lying, blaming, distorting, exaggerating, teasing, bullying, ignoring, harassing, failing to apologize, being disrespectful or rude, being abusive, derailing or undermining others, slacking, sucking up, intimidating, being embarrassing, being self-serving, being cowardly, cursing, and setting someone up to fail. These are all behaviors that we've all seen this happen, right?
Yeah. And there are many more. I mean, that was just 40 I put in the book, but what I found is that they do magically kind of correlate back to these 6 behaviors. So, the idea was the idea of this equation was for an individual. You could use it for work, you can use it in your personal life. But the idea was for an individual to at least examine and self-assess where they're weak, where they're strong on any of these 6 values. And by no means am I saying, people are weak in all these. Everybody has their own, what I call an Achilles heel. And on my website, worklifeequation.com, there's a free questionnaire people can go to. And you can answer 18 questions. And if you answer them honestly, and nobody's going to see the results other than you, you'll get a feedback as to where you're strong and where you're weak. And it's really about finding where you're weak. And really being able to sort of focus on that aspect that will have a direct impact on not only on your own happiness and success, but on the happiness and success of people that you surround yourself with. So, there's, why I think it's important to say why I wrote the book, right? Because it's not just an equation and a theoretical exercise. There's a real problem out there, out in the world. Over 60% of employees are unhappy in their workplace as a result of bad behavior. That's a stat that's been put out by a number of different researchers. That is just a staggering amount of people.
For bad behavior at work. So when they when they experience bad behavior at work, 60% of the people are, say that again, the stat again.
60% of people are unhappy at the workplace because of behavior that goes on, bad behavior that goes on in the workplace.
Yeah, that's huge.
That's pretty sad considering we spend so much of our day in work and so much of our lives in a workplace. And you know what? I don't think 60% or, the people that are causing that pain on those 60%, there's a lot of people. I don't think there's that many mean people out there. I think people do things without really appreciating or realizing the implications, and they're upsetting others. The other thing that's important is there's another interesting statistic out there suggesting that a third of marriages are happy. Okay. So that means the
Wow.
remainder are either unhappy or they end in divorce.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty sad story. And when you read about why marriages end, a lot of it relates to lack of respect for the partner, abusiveness in the marriage, lack of commitment and listening. People don't listen to their partners anymore a lot of times. And this is what sort of fragments and breaks down a marriage. So these again tie back to these 6 core behaviors that I've written about in the book. And I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule. So, particularly in my job, I want to try to get the biggest bang for the buck when I do things. And so what I try to figure out is there are 100,000 books on these 6 topics or these 6 behaviors. There's over 100,000 books on Amazon. How the heck am I going to figure out where to go, what to buy, what to digest, what the key takeaways are when there's that many? So I've kind of done a lot of research about each one of these and tried to put some concise sort of theme around each one, what people can do to improve on it, and make it more of a practical. But I've kind of done it on a research-based.
Right, and just to clarify, so your happiness and success, is that the S part?
Yes, that's the S part.
Is a function of cooperation, consideration, compassion, courtesy, respect, and responsibility. So 4 C's and 2 R's. And so
Correct.
the research that you were doing was on these 4, on the happiness and success, and in addition to the 4 C's and 2 R's, or when you talk about researching, what is it that you've researched?
The research was really on the 4 C's and the 2 R's,
okay.
but the correlation to happiness and success is that a successful workplace is going to be much better off if the people are happy. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of evidence out there that a happy group of people and a team that works well together, and basically a team that works well together that exhibits these values is more likely to be successful than a team that has some flaws in there that's going to derail the performance of that team. Mm-hmm. So success is definitely an output of these values, and happiness is another one. At the end of the day, I go back to the marriage scenario, or a team that's not cooperating. There's no happiness on a team when there's dysfunction, or there's backstabbing, there's withholding of information, there's different agendas. That's not a good working relationship or a happy situation. So what I'm saying is that the research has been done around these core values, which eliminate or can eliminate a lot of the bad behavior that basically saps away from happiness and success. Mm-hmm. On the happiness side, I do want to talk a little bit about a happiness. In the book I write, there's a famous positive psychologist called Dr. Martin Seligman. I think you've heard of him. Yes, a lot of people have heard a lot of things. He's one of the few people actively studying positive psychology. Everybody focuses on depression and all of the bad things. He's trying to figure out, well, what is it that makes people happy? Mm-hmm. And one of the themes I touch in the book is, happiness. He talks about 3 happy lives. Mm-hmm. What he calls is the pleasant life, the good life, and the meaningful life. Mm-hmm. And a lot of us, I think, and a lot of us are just kind of caught up in that, the pleasant life, right? We want tangible things. We're chasing the next thing we want to buy. Money kind of drives a lot of behavior around here. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is that his studies have indicated that these are not long-lasting pleasures, and it's very evident in very wealthy, successful people who have actually who've written and confessed how unhappy they are despite their wealth, because these are not sustainable pleasures for people. It's not sustainable happiness. They become addictive. You want more and more, and it ends up in a pretty sad state. But the good life that he writes about is more engagement from parenting or a hobby or your work, and that's a much more lasting opportunity for happiness. Mm-hmm. And then the last one, the meaningful life, is around really doing things bigger than yourself. That really does. And why do people do philanthropy, right? Why do successful people? They're finding more meaning in life, mm-hmm. and there's ways for you, me, or anybody else to get him to get that piece of the meaningful life into your life. You don't have to be the multi-billionaire philanthropist to do that.
Yeah.
But you know, you have to factor in those components into at least give perspective on happiness. But again, the equation, you know, if you're not happy in work, if you're not successful in work and things are going on bad around you, how can you be happy? It's very
Yeah.
hard to be
Yeah,
happy.
it's funny because you're the second person in the last 12 hours that told me the same concept. And it's not this actually person, I was interviewing a gentleman about successful male and what is this a successful male? And he has studied, like yourself, a whole bunch of different research. And what he found was that success is, first of all, we don't have a holistic definition of success. That's his particular work. But what he said is that it's a very similar kind of equation. And he said that, you know, he's hoping to coach 1 million men, and he's talked to, you know, thousands of people already. He's in Australia. And he said, there are 3 types of guys that come to my workshop. They're the guys who come in that just have a job. They just, like, I have a job, you know, I have a job. That's good. Like, I'm just working, right? You got to work, I'm working. And then there are people who have a job and they're trying to move up the corporate ladder so that they can buy things, so that they can have the material pleasures. And then there are the guys who, and I'm using guys only because he's focusing, that's his target audience. And he said, and the third level are those people who really, really want to have impact in the world. And he said, sadly, there's a really small percentage. I think it was, he said, because most of my friends fall into that category, but I think he said something shocking. Like, I want to say like 20% or less of people really.
There you go, 80-20 rule.
Yeah, really want to focus on that meaningful life. But that, and so you can really look at the things like if you have a life of cooperation and consideration and compassion and courtesy and respect and responsibility, that does give you meaning. You know, it gives you meaning, which gives you success, that then gives you happiness. In fact, he was saying, which was interesting too, to go back to what you're saying, he said, that to reinforce what you're saying with his clients, he's had thousands of clients. He said, you know, what's hard is that I talk to some people where it's not a balance. Like they actually are really into the spiritual realm and they've done all sorts of things to supposedly be enlightened, but they're not responsible. They're not bringing in money, and they're not raising money to take care of their family and themselves and their livelihood, you know, so that it really is a balance of all of these factors. And I think, because I think a lot of, if you were to read a whole bunch of self-help books, which I have, a lot of them talk about cooperation, consideration, compassion, courtesy, respect, but they don't talk about responsibility, which I think is an interesting thing that I'm beginning to open my eyes to.
Well, I mean, actually, I asked a lot of folks that I interviewed for the book, I asked them to rank, you know, which ones they thought were the most important. And actually, responsibility came on top. Because quite honestly, if you're not responsible, bad things are going to happen. And we see that a lot in this world, right? There's very smart people who do really stupid things.
Right.
And it's more around I write in the book that there's 3 aspects of responsibility. There's legal, which we all know the laws, and some people break the laws every day if they drive over the speed limit, but it's all relative, right? There's the social, which is kind of more about, well, am I going to recycle this or am I not? You know, this kind of, but the biggest component that trips people up is the moral. And that's always the gray zone. And to some degree that's determined by, you know, what's responsible relative to the environment you're in. And people, there's a great story I write about a guy who does a really dumb thing. I mean, really irresponsible. He's getting a divorce and he's trying to figure out how to pay off his wife. And he goes out and invests all his money in the .com era into something very high risk. And then the .com bubble happened and he lost it all. And it was a disaster. But he was a very smart guy. But he didn't use some common sense. And I think at the end of the day, you know, I always say around responsibility, you know, judgment is key. You got to use some common sense. People sometimes forget to do that. The other thing is it's all about who you surround yourself with to some extent. I talk a lot about, you know, there is, you know, being with the right people, having the right people in the right seats in an organization, that's what really drives success as far as, a sort of a really responsible group or individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another, I call my equation a heuristic, which
Mm-hmm.
is essentially, it's not based necessarily on pure factual evidence, but it's intuitively rational. And there's a famous MIT guy called Kurt Lewin that came up with kind of what he described as the first heuristic, or it's a famous heuristic, which is that behavior is a function of the person in his or her environment. And I think everybody can kind of relate to that. You may be a good person, but you're thrown into a tough environment or a rough environment, or you're surrounded by a bunch of scoundrels.
Right.
It doesn't take long if you stay in that group to start to sort of fall into that mode. And so being surrounded by the right people is so critical in life. And if you're not, you really have to get away.
You know what? I'm laughing because I know that both of us worked at GE. So I worked at General Electric in their financial management program. I was there for 5 years. And it's a really cutthroat environment. It's great. It was during the Jack Welch reign, and he did some fantastic things, including like train people and all, Crotonville, all these different things. But it was a really harsh environment, and people were really brutal to each other. I mean, it was all about profits and where you were on your bottom line, and if your division was pulling or not. And so I was raised in that culture, and you start acclimating to it. You start becoming that culture.
Yeah.
And then I moved to the Pacific Northwest and California, and people thought I was like a demon. Like they couldn't even, because you adapt to what you think that's normal. And then I went over to even Microsoft, which is pretty hardcore. I was even too hardcore for Microsoft.
From GE.
Yeah, from GE. It's kind of amazing. But yeah, to go through and validate that. All right, so here you actually have in your book, which I love at the end, you actually have a survey that a person can complete. So a person would complete, and let me make sure I understand this, a person would complete this, and for the one for responsibility is asking yourself where you fall on these three. You narrowed responsibility to three things, which I love the simplicity of that. So it says responsibility is you, the person, and then the name of the individual. So it's like CJ in this case. Does CJ have the courage to step up to greater challenges and make time to focus on self-improvement? That's one area. So that's almost personal responsibility, I guess, or responsibility for self-growth.
Yeah. I would just add to that, a big factor in responsibility is the courage, right? A lot of people shy away from doing the right thing. We see that every day in life. They don't want to fight the battle. There's too much politics going around. There's too much risk going around. But not standing up for what you really, really believe in is a big mistake. And to be honest with you, you have to have some courage in life. And some people don't want to go that way. My view is, if you want to have a good, happy life, have a bit of courage in it, and you will get much more out of it.
Right.
But that's my 2 cents on that one.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, the reason that happens is because then you're living in integrity to your values, right? If you see something that is wrong or bad or hurtful, and 9 out of 10 people would say it's wrong, hurtful, and bad, right? And you just sit around and don't do anything about it, then you're out of integrity to what you firmly believe in. And I think that saps you of power, energy, and because you're out of integrity. So
I think we struggle with that every day. And I think, if you ask 10 random people if they've got high integrity, they'll probably all say yes.
Right.
But then if you ask them, well, were you in a meeting today or with somebody today, and they said something you completely disagree with, and they asked your opinion, and you didn't want to take them on, and you said, sure, yeah, what? So where's your integrity in that?
Yeah.
It does happen to us all the time. I think a lot of what I do in the book is to sort of try to provide people the sort of the message to be much more conscious of it. We can only, you read a book, you can only do so many things at the end of a book, right? You can't have a laundry list of 100 action items, right?
Right.
I mean, I read a lot of books, and I'm looking for what are the few ahas that are relevant to me. And what I want somebody to get out of this book is that questionnaire that you're referring to in the book is the one I put online, so I can make it very easy. You can do it in 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. You can get your result. And what I want to do is just provide somebody focus. Where do you need to focus? Where do you need to work on? Right now, one of the things that drove me towards doing this is several years ago, I got a sort of a work coach, but I kind of more view her as a life coach. You know, work and life are very sort of interconnected. She's very good. And actually, she was the one that inspired me a lot to write the book because I found from her that her name is Rose Andrews. I found from Rose that, you know, there's a lot of problems out there. And we brainstormed a lot of this together. And she was instrumental in me moving along with this. But what she did was, I think I understand myself a lot better today, having gone through this, than I did a few years ago. And what I regret is that I hadn't done something like this many, many years ago. Because as you get older, you might get wiser or whatever, that the old adage. But I think I would be leading my life slightly differently had I read this, and I would be doing more to improve on things that I needed to do. I mean, I took the test on the weekend just sort of gauge myself, and I still got some wicked areas to focus on. I'm going to confess, it's kind of sad, but you know, but let's be honest, as you get older, it's much harder to change. I just focus on, it makes me refocus. You know, I have a trouble with consideration is around, the whole consideration chapter is around really listening, right? Being in the moment. And a lot of people struggle with that, right? I have a tendency to listen to respond, which is what a lot of people do. So I'm already, before somebody's even half started what they're on, I'm already thinking about what's my response. I'm not listening to what they're really saying. I'm not watching their body language. I'm not absorbing what I need to do. That's a very dangerous thing, and it's a very inconsiderate thing to do to the party that's talking to you. And it's very interesting, you know, I write that, you know, we teach leaders to do professional speaking and public speaking, and, you know, from kids onwards and up, we focus on all this speaking and communication. We don't teach people to listen.
We don't.
And you know, and really, it's a very sad thing that we don't spend more time on that. Because I think it's a very prominent fault in a lot of people. Yeah. And this is again, you go back to the marriage situation. You're not listening to your partner. Or issues start to arise, and they feel ignored, and you know, the things deteriorate.
Yeah, wait.
It's a dangerous one. That one.
I want to actually go into that consideration, and then I want to loop back to the responsibility. So here's some things that you had said in your book is three, just boiling it down to three simple things. So consideration, paying close attention to what people are saying and ask for clarification where appropriate, and is fully present. So that's one area. Is willing to be quiet and listen, and not fearful, and is not fearful of what is said, remains calm, concentrates on the matter at hand, and pays close attention. And the third part that you have is probes carefully, being more reflective than reactionary and listening. Will ask why, what, and how type of questions.
Yeah, and that last one is always a good one, because when I was working at GE, there was a guy that I worked for that he was amazing at, when there was a question on something, an issue or whatever, he was so amazing at not just asking the obvious question, but then the next question. He would drill down so effectively. And it was amazing that what you unraveled from the follow-up, the probing, was vastly more powerful than what you would have gotten if you'd just done the superficial, okay, let's just try to sort of rationalize with the first question and not move further. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, it's the old story, right? When people are under pressure, or when you hear somebody speak, they don't always communicate precisely what they're feeling. Mm-hmm. So it's really important, I think, to probe with people, to delve in a little bit further, to dig deeper at what's the root cause going on here, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that we have that between people all the time. Right. But a lot of us don't. We just gloss over. It's like, you know, so what's the problem?
You know, it's funny.
Right, fix it.
It's funny because when I was first taking a coaching class, they were talking about this idea that you think when you're problem solving, you think that you're talking about the same issue with the person, and you may be talking about two completely different things. So let's say that I was really upset when my mom didn't show up for Thanksgiving on time. Okay, so and I'm going to have my own reaction of what that means. Like so the CJ reaction would be like, oh, that's rude because she kept everyone else um, uh, waiting for her, and you may be thinking something entirely different. And I may be saying to you, yeah, I was just so upset with my mom. Um, you know what I mean? And you could go, oh, absolutely. And you may be thinking, I was mad at your mom because she always shows up late. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah,
So you think you're talking about the same thing,
but
but
you're not.
you're not at all. So this is
I had
my
that with my wife the whole time.
so we were coaching, and I thought, no, I'm so intuitive, and I'm so in tune with my husband. We've been married for like 10 years. I can complete his sentences. I know what he's thinking. So we're in the car, and he said something along those lines, and I said, oh yeah, absolutely. And then I thought, actually, I don't know. And I said, when you said that, did you mean, this, or this? And he's like, none of those things. That I thought I had listened to him so clearly and knew exactly what he was thinking. I had no idea. And this is someone who I really do know very well for 10 years. And I think I've heard every story, but there's always something new you don't know. And until you ask those probing questions, I think you really don't know. You think you know, but you
Yeah,
don't.
absolutely. And the other area I focus in on just helping people think about listening better is that we got to slow down, and it's very hard for people to slow down. So I talk, there's a lot of articles out here nowadays on these topics like meditation, yoga, breathing. But it might sound goofy to a lot of people, but I mean, we actually have meditation in our office here
Nice.
twice a week, which is really nice. And people who have started to get acquainted with it's a great way to kind of just slow yourself down, get perspective, not overreact, and just be more in the moment with people, be more present. And
Hmm.
it's not a complicated tool, it's not an expensive tool, it's something easy to learn or reasonably easy to learn. And the harder thing I think is to put it into long-term practice. But it's a very valuable thing. There's another research done that most of us don't breathe properly. I mean,
Hmm.
as the story is the baby born breathes perfectly, and then
Right.
beyond that point, all the stresses in life shorten how much we're breathing, and you got the panic attacks, and and your brain can't sort of function properly enough to really do the best that you be the best that you can be. So
Hmm.
there's a lot. That's a really tough topic, I think, or that tough value to deal with. Interestingly enough, I think I said there's about 100,000 books on these six values, or at least over 100. I was actually surprised when I looked at the numbers, and this is when I wrote the book. I think about 50% of them were on cooperation. So I think
Fascinating.
which actually kind of makes sense in the sense of there's so much written in business about teamwork and teaming is so important.
Right.
But I feel when I was talking to you about the order of importance, I actually think beyond responsibility, I think respect is still
Yeah, I would have
is really
thought.
the one I still struggle a little bit with self-respect,
Yeah.
and I think that that's a big generational challenge
Mm.
too. I
Hmm.
think that particularly, the generation, the millennial, not so much I think it's the millennials, right? Yeah, because they're the ones before the latest generation.
Right.
There's the generation that kind of the lost generation. I think that I've noticed certainly in that generation, some of them tend to be a little. I think it's embedded in their genes that they're just a little less respectful than certainly my generation was. And respect is so important,
Hmm.
right? I mentioned again in a marriage, it's incredibly
Yeah,
important. So
absolutely.
important in work. If you
Yeah.
want to succeed in the business world or whatever you're doing in life with other people, where you're doing business or whatever, you need to be respectful.
Yeah. So, and I just want to add some dimensionality. So, respect is leverage your talent to their highest potential, encourages thinking and ideas, cultivates good debate, and delegates well, giving people ownership. that you admit when you're wrong. You show humility and respect for the input of others. You don't believe that you know it all. You are tactful when you disagree. You don't take it personally most of the time, and you're not in denial. And for the team or enterprise, you assess this based on the leadership team. So these are the aspects of respect. And then you're talking about self-respect. These were just the boiled down to three
Right.
aspects of respect.
Right.
Um, I am surprised because I think that I wonder why. Why is there not enough books about this?
Respect. I
Yeah,
think
why is it that
I
there are
think there were
few?
10,000 when I looked on this topic, which is about what 10% of all of the books on these values. But look, I think it's actually interesting when I looked at the books that were on self-respect. If you Google self-respect, you tend to see books on self-esteem,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really interesting. I don't have the name of the folks. There was a really interesting book written by a lady about
Kristen
the
Neff. Kristen
yes,
Neff from University of
Neff,
Texas. Yeah.
fascinating
Yeah.
about how people don't appreciate the fact that self-esteem is not self-respect. And
Mm-hmm.
we've been pummeling our kids for the last generation or so of self-esteem. It's the old story of, everybody's got to win the soccer game, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, not everybody wins. There's winners and losers, but we try to make people feel that everybody's a winner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually the worst thing to do because what we're doing is we're trying to sort of tell everybody that you're on a level playing field, which in reality isn't the case.
Mm-hmm.
And when the reality sets in, it's suddenly like, oh my God, I'm not as successful as that person. I'm not as good as that person. And then people get depressed as a result of it, and they lose they basically don't have self-respect. What I love about self-respect is, and this is to me, to be honest with you, I struggle with this.
Mm-hmm.
I think, do you respect yourself for who you are, what you do?
Mm-hmm.
And it is very hard for people to do that because we live in a world where we constantly look at others, compare, subconsciously think about how do I stack up against that neighbor or that person or this person? Why aren't I quite as successful? How do I get ahead? And people aren't happy.
Right.
They're not happy with where they're at. And, some of the happiest people I've seen are people that, a buddy of mine used to be a teacher. He had the funnest life. He wasn't overly materialistic, but he certainly had made ways to find things to do, have fun.
Right.
He had more fun than most people I know with 10 times what he had. And
Right.
they're trying to figure out how do I make the next dollar so I can buy that boat over there.
Right.
And so to me, this is another area that I think people really have to delve into. And there's a lot in the book around this topic.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I struggle with is it's okay to be humble and wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a terrible tendency. This is one of my faults in life is that I don't like to be wrong.
Right.
And I don't like to sometimes sort of admit faults.
Right.
And I sometimes, don't always want to apologize. But the value, but what I've found as I've focused on this more is an apology is so valuable.
So
It's highly appreciated, and B, it's not a hard thing to give if
it
you
isn't.
give it,
You know,
and you will feel better for it. But that's human psychology at work, I think.
well, I was in the court and I was a mediator in the small claims court where people had, they're disputing about money for, 5,000 or under. And so I would listen to both parties. Okay, what is it that you want? They would finally be talking and listening to each other in the way that you're talking about in a respectful dialogue. And in the end, when it was, what do you want from this person? They needed to apologize. That was the first and foremost thing. And it's like, it's like
You went to court.
you could have spent 40 hours of your life. You wouldn't have had to spend all this money, time, and energy. And if you had just apologized in the beginning, you could have avoided this whole thing. But that experience when I was 3 years in court mediating, the one big takeaway is just say sorry. It's
Yeah.
the thing that will, and so when my husband and we get into our own domestic mediations, and I'll literally say to him, okay, we can spend an hour or two and we can drag this out. It's like 9 o'clock. at night, or we can just repeat what each other has said and then say sorry. So which do you want to do? I mean, I've seen this 1,000 times.
It's a great tip, and you both say sorry.
Yeah, just so we literally force ourselves. I'm like, okay, so when I didn't say so and so, when you did this and with the trash, and I did, and you said that, and I said this, and then what you feel is this, and these 3 points, and when you feel like I do this, it makes you feel this way, and then did I get it right? And he's like, yes, and then I'm like, I'm sorry, and like 20 minutes later, the whole thing is done. It's completely finished.
You see that, and it's amazing how much damage ensues if you don't say sorry. I mean, I just think with my wife, I don't want to admit fault. Right, I don't want to say I'm sorry, and it gets into, and it just gets worse. And it's no different than another bad attribute is when people have a bad tone to their voice. It's the tone. I think I mentioned. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but I was in a meeting one day, and the boss I was working for at the time was really kind of disrespectful in his tone at the beginning of the meeting. And it completely threw everybody off in the room, particularly me. And I spent a whole day brewing over it. And then I'm thinking, what a lost productivity from that. But it was just so wrenching. And all the person needed to have done was say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way. And they could have had a much more productive meeting. They could have and it's to say, but we don't always think enough about doing it. Mm-hmm. And it's a simple action like that can save a lot of aggravation.
Okay, can I offer one more tip that I love? So I interviewed this woman. She was talking about relationships and, how to, when you're actually having an argument with your loved one, how you can get out of it. And she said, and so we talked about apology. And the best thing she said is say, you know what? Can I do a redo, or say, if I could say what I said, like I've done this with my son. I'm like, you know what? I'm sorry that I yelled at you about computer games. if I've been playing too much computer games, if I were to do it all over again, what I would have said is blankety blankety blank. Like, I really feel like you're spending a lot of time on the computers, and I'm worried about what that impact may have on your overall health because you're not going outside. And so how can we actually get you to do some more outdoor activities, right? But instead it was like some, ranting mother, like, what are you doing? But if I were to do it again, I would have said blah, blah, blah. Like, even that makes such a huge difference because you're kind of doing a redo. That's my other tip. That's my
I like that.
Favorite.
That's a good tip. I really do like that, redo, because I could use that with my son too for similar reasons.
Yeah, because like after you're calm, you can go back and say, okay, yeah, this is what
this is what I really should have said.
This is what I really should have said. I want to go back to responsibility because like, as you said, it's one of the things that people find are most important. We talked about one out of the 3 things. We talked about has the courage to step up to greater challenges and make time to focus on self-improvement, takes ownership and has good influencing skills, and does not point fingers or blame at each other. That's so critical, right? And has good judgment and is highly trusted and gets right things done effectively and efficiently and attracts and leverages good people. Tell me more about these, because as you said, this is one of the ones that was number 1 for people, and I want to make sure we hit all those things.
I think that's the thing is I think we live in an environment where people fear blame, right? First of all, I don't like it if somebody blames me for something, but a human reaction quite often is if things are in a tough state, if you're in a tough state, like at work, right? There's stress, things don't always go to plan. And when you're in that environment, people will sometimes try to deflect the blame because they don't want to take it. There's consequences sometimes for the actions that occur. So I think it is a tendency for people to try to blame stuff, but the fallout effects of doing that, blaming others and not accepting responsibility, is far worse, because more often than not, people see through the blame factor. Ultimately, stuff comes out in the wash. And then you get a double whammy for it, because A, you were seen as blaming somebody unfairly, and B, you were accountable and you didn't accept it. So again, it's a tough area, but again, a lot of it is, I think, is just common sense. And, it does link into some of the other components in the sense of, you're generally a team with people when
Right.
there's responsibilities. I mean, responsibilities can fall on an individual, but there's also a group of there's collective
Right.
responsibilities.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it's a, it is a very tough area. I think, again, having the right people and the right seats, right competencies, right character. Um, those are very important factors in making sure that you kind of have a responsible outcome to the situation.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think that that's really true.
yeah, so it all comes down to judgment, right people, and and doing the logical thing.
I actually I had early my first job at Microsoft. I was running a direct marketing campaign, and it was like a multi-million dollar direct marketing campaign. And one, we had like with direct marketing campaigns, you're always running different offers and trying to figure out which one has the highest purchase and sales afterwards. And so we ran one and we put the wrong phone number on. And it was one of like maybe 6 or 10 different executions. So 1/10 of the whatever millions of dollars that we're spending had the wrong phone number, which is really bad, right? And so I went into my boss, and it was actually myself and this other woman that were running this program. And I went in and I said, I have to tell you that there's a wrong phone number here, and I feel so awful, and I don't know what to do to fix this because it's already been printed, it's already been shipped out. We literally can't fix this. I mean, aside from like figuring out, and I've asked the customer service if we could reroute the phone numbers, all these different things, if we could buy, all these. I'm like, I don't know what to do, and I feel really bad. I don't know, deducted out of my salary. Like, I really didn't know what to
Did you
do.
keep your job?
Yeah, and I was like, I feel really bad, but it didn't feel right not to say anything.
No, but mistakes happen, and I think that people appreciate it. It may seem counterintuitive, being accepting responsibility and being proactive about it, but I think people appreciate it so
Yeah.
more
And
because things usually get worse when it's not acknowledged.
yeah, because then you don't
And
know, right? And then you're like, I hope no one
it's
just notices
it's
it.
exactly. Most people go, I hope nobody finds out. Eventually, it gets caught, and then it's like it's by then it's worse. But it is a tough one. One thing I do want to just make sure I capture with you and the listeners is that I had an early sort of prerequisite to these values in the book that basically was all around self-awareness and
Mm,
self-improvement because quite honestly there's no point in buying this book or taking that questionnaire if you're not really willing to be a little vulnerable with yourself, be self-aware about yourself, and be willing to make change, right? I mean, you wouldn't buy it, I don't think, or you wouldn't
right,
want to look into this more unless you really want to make a change or you really want to
right,
find ways to get better.
right.
But there was some interesting research as I kind of looked at the self-awareness, and one of my favorites was around a couple of a psychologist and a psychiatrist had written a very interesting book called Imaginary Crimes: How to Stop Punishing Yourself.
Hmm.
How to Stop Punishing Yourself. And the premise around the book was that most people's faults that transpire during life or behavioral issues originate from your family of origin.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting this because a lot of it, and when they talk about family of origin, they're talking about the relationship that you had with your parents or your siblings,
Right.
but very much in the family sphere. So, and a lot of around what transpired during childhood. So I'll give you a simple example. Somebody who's got an inferiority complex. A lot of those inferiority complexes arose in youth, and then what they do as they mature into adults is they basically overcompensate.
Right.
All right. So you get the Napoleon complex, or you get some other sort of overcompensation, which turns them from, into a monster almost, or a
Right.
really dislikable person. And they don't fully appreciate that. So I think
Mm,
that the self awareness aspect of it really is very, very important.
mm.
Kind of what are some of the root causes that could have driven some of these, or whatever your Achilles heel is in behavior, because I think it will help you. It will help you get more better
Right. Yeah,
when
but
you
I think
confront that.
I think if you have to be vulnerable enough to say that I have that, right? And
Yes,
then you have to be open and willing to change, because if you don't, in the mediation they always ask, are you willing to listen? Are you willing to be open, or are you willing to change?
right,
Because if you're not, you can't facilitate anything. You can't facilitate your own self improvement. You can't facilitate two people trying to get together. You can't do anything if you're not
right.
willing to do those three things, which I think are really important. Um,
No, they are, and yeah. So it's a big commitment to make.
it is. It's not easy. Like once you say yes
No,
to that, it's not easy to do, right? I mean, to commit to those things and do them, and see, your dark side, or some areas of weakness. That's not easy to do, but the
no, but
benefits, like you're saying, yeah.
the one thing I want to say to that is that, and is that I really think it's important to get a coach,
Yep.
right? Now, when we'll call it whatever you want, but I wish I think people tend to think that only executives get coaches, or, in a lot of companies. At the end of the day, to me, a coach around this type of situation, we'll call it an executive coach or a life coach or whatever, is such a fundamentally important commitment, right? Whether or not you're 22 years old, I would spend the money. People will spend money to go to a trainer, to
Mm-hmm.
go and work out in the gym, but they're not willing to spend money to go to a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to find so much more. You really need that independent party who's experienced enough to help you find yourself. You're not going to find it. You're not going to find it on your own. It's going to be very hard to find it on your own because most people are in denial.
Yeah. Well, I think
And
it's hard to find on your own because most people, including myself, I actually am a coach and I have a coach because it's really hard to see yourself clearly.
yeah,
It's just you just have little blind spots, regardless of how much self awareness and work that you've done, which I've done a lot in both. You still have little blind spots that someone listening to the story in a kind of detached meta perspective can hear things that you're not going to hear or you're not going to see because it's you. So
right.
I think that that's just having a third party just helping and who really listens can actually be huge. I think so. I mean, I have a coach myself and I am a coach. So of course I believe in the whole idea, but I could agree with you more. I love, so we actually didn't cover all the different values in your book, but get the book and you can read more about them. So we didn't cover cooperation, courtesy. Those are the only ones we didn't, and compassion. But
Compassion, yeah, yeah.
yes, get
No,
the
there's a lot on that. And actually, the interesting one on there is self-compassion. The importance
hmm
of really be compassionate to yourself.
yeah,
Not
love
people
yourself.
tend to think compassion is a very outward thing to others, and it is. It's taking action to help others, but you have to take action to help yourself. And the simple tip I had there is to cultivate some daily compassion action. So, for instance, it can be a simple little acts during the day where you take the time out to be more attentive to people that you interact with and don't subconsciously ignore an issue that's going on with them and exhibit some degree of compassion.
Hmm
It's not a hard thing to do. There's some tips in there about how to go about it. I just think that's, it's a lot more than I'm going to try to get into some big philanthropic exercise.
Oh
Well,
no, yeah,
that's a great thing. We have to, a lot of us, I write about compassion fatigue. I mean, I live in New York City. We walk the streets. There's a lot of homeless. At some point, you get what they describe as compassion fatigue. You cannot do anymore. They say emergency medical workers get this, military folks get this, but it affects us too daily.
hmm
Where you just cannot. You're beyond the capability mentally of how do I help all these people,
right.
and you get the fatigue and to the point that you can't do anything. You don't do anything. And you have the thing there. You have to be conscious about that.
And just
Um,
stopping. Like sometimes I'll see a homeless. We have sadly in Seattle, we have homeless people who are like regulars. Like I'm used to seeing them, and I've seen them every day, so I can see when actually things aren't going well. Like I'll say to them, "Wow." what's going on? How are things going? Just because I know I've seen them throughout every single day, that I know that things are
And
going.
then you know that the bad days you can do something extra special for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah. And I
makes
think it's just taking the time, even like talking to, like when I get coffee, sometimes I'll look and I can just tell, because I'm a coach, right? I'll just see their face and I'm like, I'll see something. I'm like, oh, you're having a hard time today. And they're like, oh, yes. And then like they go on and tell me stuff. But it's just like it's giving them, you saw their face. They had a like kind of face, like a little quirk or something, a micro movement with their face. And just asking the question like, how are you doing, or how are you feeling? Just, it doesn't have to be some huge thing, I don't think.
absolutely not. I think that's the problem. Is too many people think. I actually asked my team once. I said, "When was the last compassionate act you had?" And they were all thinking about the big compassionate act. I don't know when I was last that compassionate. And it was really interesting because it really does come down to that they are a very compassionate group, and you sometimes ignore some of the small things that you do, just kind of ruling it out as well. That's kind of normal, but
Right.
it depends what you're doing and what's
Yeah, it
needed.
could just be even holding a door open to some, like a
Well,
mom with a
that
stroller.
I view as more courtesy, but compassion, but yeah, there's some overlap there for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, see, for you as a man, you probably view it as courtesy. For me as a woman, I just view that as, oh, I remember being there with the stroller and trying to open the door. It's just awful. And no one would open the door for me. Like, I'm going to open the door for this poor woman. So it's probably based on her gender. It comes from a different
No,
way.
I try to be courteous when I can.
I love it. All right, so we've been talking to Bill Maw about his book, The Work-Life Equation. Thank you so much for being here.
DJ, thanks so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. And again, my work site's www.worklifeequation, and there's some free resources there for people that are interested in learning more.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. Would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.